You are not going to believe this. The IMF has come out and said exactly, almost word for word, the same thing as the Bank of Canada. It's almost like it was planned, it's almost like it was scripted by Klaus himself. So let's take a look into this and see what's going on. Also, see how wages are holding up against inflation right now. And yeah, it's just going to blow your mind because I'm going to show you at least a number of inflation that is more accurate than the CPI, which the government uses. So let's take a look here. So Bank of Canada will likely need to hold rates above 4% in 2023, says the IMF. Okay. The IMF, in its annual review of Canada's economy released late Thursday, said the key immediate priority is to bring inflation down without triggering a recession, because that's been done before and it's so easy, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of insane that they are coming out with the same statement almost word for word as the Bank of Canada. Are they copying the Bank of Canada, or is the Bank of Canada copying the IMF? Because that's the question you've got to ask when their statements are just almost word for word exactly the same. But I think thinking about a soft landing in the situation that we're in is almost impossible. You're trying to think about the 1% chance of a soft landing, which has never happened when they have tightened at the pace that they are tightening. And this is record pace, but even when they tighten at pace that is, as severe or similar during the 1970s, even though, remember, during the 70s, they took rates much higher. But you have to remember, back then there was much less debt around in the economy. The economy has so much debt, it is mind-blowing, both held by private sector corporations and held by households. Canada's economy revolves around debt slavery, which is essentially how it is right now. So the bank has raised at a record pace of 400 basis points in 9 months to fight inflation that is far beyond its target. We've talked about this before. Its target should really be zero. There's this target of 2% inflation, but who wants 2% inflation? In fact, I did a poll on this, and most people would prefer 0%, which is how you would think. It is ridiculous. And the people who think 2% are probably thinking that because they've heard it so many times. They must think it's actually there for a reason. Of course, it is there for a reason. It's there so the government's deficits can be inflated away at 2%. And it is almost criminal what they are doing. But really, if they have a target at all, if you want them to have a target, it should be 0%. Inflation affects the poorest people in the country. And there are a lot of those people who are really on the edge right now because of things like rising food prices. They're up 10%, but it's probably more like 30% in reality. So it's absolutely, inflation has been edging down after surging to a 4-decade high in June, but it is more than 3 times the central bank's 2% target. The IMF said inflation should continue declining, return to the 2% target by end of 2024, while economic growth was set to slow to 3.3% in 2022 and 1.5% next year. Slowing growth should also push unemployment to rise moderately and reach the pre-pandemic level of around 6% by next year. And remember, they almost get things wrong constantly, just like the central bank, for which we pay millions of our tax dollars into, to have this institution get everything wrong, do all this research. The IMF is very much the same way, as in that they get things wrong all the time. So if they're coming out and saying it's 6%, it's probably likely going to be around 12%, something like that. That's just my base case. But, unemployment is going to shoot up, and the reality has to be, is it actually going to be accurate, the numbers that we're fed? We already know in the US, between the establishment establishment survey and the other survey, basically you can see that there is a massive divergence between the household and establishment survey of unemployment. So it's very, very interesting that that's happening. It makes me question what's going on here in Canada. We don't even have as many data points as that for unemployment, unfortunately. It's really, really sad, but because Canada is such a small country, we rely a lot on the government. The government makes these things esoteric so people can't understand them. And it's just, it's really annoying and frustrating for people like us who are trying to understand what's really going on versus what the government is telling us, because we know it's factually incorrect and always has been, because they are pathological liars. Okay, so if I want to show you this, because they talk about how inflation is slowing. This is shadow stats, and I've used this chart a number of times, and I think it's really, really important to look at this chart. So basically, you can go to this website, link is going to be in the description, and it will show you. But if you look at where inflation has really been since 2007, it's been above 10% if you use the SGS alternate, which is 1980s base CPI. So we're talking about a CPI that is based off the 1980s CPI. You know, it's not the most accurate thing in the world, but it's definitely more accurate than the CPI that we have today, which is just completely corrupted using substitution and all these different things. And if you want to see a video explained on that, then we can certainly do one in the future. Just drop a comment below. But yeah, it's very, very interesting when you look at it being above 10% for the longest period of time. Now, this is in the US, but it doesn't really matter, because the reality is that it will be very, very similar. You see how the Canada and US CPI practically follow each other, because the US has such a massive effect on demand for both Canada and even Mexico as well. So it's interesting that it has been so high, and it's actually devastating for a lot of people, because you can see how it's shot up here, and it's way above even during the 70s here, and you can see that it's well above like 15%, 17% is around where it got to, and it's not even come down below 15%. This is updated every time the inflation is released. You can see it says October 2022 right there now. So it's kind of crazy when you think about that, because if I show you this chart, it's just going to make a lot of people cry. So if you look at this, I mean, this is wage growth, and you can see that wage growth shot up during the Cerveza sickness. You can see how it shot up there because of all the government transfer payments, and you can essentially see how it's hovering around 3% right now. And for most people, they have seen their income decline in real terms. Unless you got like a 30% rise, I don't even think it's arguable that you have like you've actually got a raise this year. Even if you've got 20%, does that not, I mean, isn't that insane when you really think about it? You just need to make like 20% just to stay with your head above water, just so that you're not losing purchasing power. That's not even making any extra money. So imagine people who got 0%, and my thoughts and prayers for those people, because you know it is terrible what they are going through, and they are losing so much purchasing power that. And this is what people don't really understand, that I've been saying for the longest period of time before they started raising rates. And I said that they were going to raise rates. I didn't realize that it was going to be this high. I didn't think they'd ever get as high as they have got, to be fair. But the interesting thing is inflation would have killed the economy. It would have killed everything, the housing market anyway, because people's purchasing power is declining so much. You know, I've always said this, it does not matter what the government tells you is going on with inflation. It is irrelevant. I do not understand why the financial media even bothers with it, but obviously funded by the government, they're going to obviously talk about it a lot. But the reality is inflation is a lot higher than that, and let's say it's at 20%. You know, that's a huge decline in people's purchasing power. Can that continue for 2-3 years? Absolutely not. People aren't going to be able to pay their bills, and we're already at that point. And the thing is, interest rates or no interest rate hikes, it would have just took a little while longer, but you would have still had the same effect from inflation. Because if you look at the chart on shadow stats, it hasn't really gone under 10% for the past decade and decade and a half. So that really shows you how insane things have gotten with inflation. And that really shows you the stagflation as well, how people's wages have not been rising, they haven't been keeping up, and that's why it feels like they're always getting behind. And you know, if inflation's running at 20% and housing prices are down 20% nominal terms year over year, then that means they're down 40% in real terms. So that is a huge decline. And you can see how even for most people, most cities, it's still wildly unaffordable for people to buy a house. I mean, even a city like Calgary that is seen as a more affordable place, single family home sales are down 60% year over year. People cannot afford to buy a single family home. They're buying condos and townhouses because that's all they can afford. So even those prices have to come back down. So it is just absolutely nuts when you really think about all the adjustments that have to take place. And really, going forward, I think it's so hard to predict now where inflation goes because they've took interest rates so high. But I think that things that we actually need, like food and energy, they're going to continue rising in price. Remember, the US still has to fill up that SPR, and that is going to be one challenge that they are going to have without sending oil prices much higher, which will send energy costs much higher. We now have winter that is coming. Well, it's here, and it's very cold in lots of places right now. So energy demand is going up. So you have to think about that and what that's going to mean going forward and what that's going to look like. So energy and food could continue rising in cost whilst everything else comes down. Rents, housing prices, stock prices, corporate earnings. So, and that will be the recession. That will lead to a lot more unemployment and a lot more pain that people just don't understand. And really, I think in a place like Canada now, year over year housing prices actually going up in real terms when you actually look at inflation in the light of reality. I don't think it's going to happen for the next decade or so. You might get nominal prices up year over year, but real prices going up, I don't think so. I think there'll be better places to invest in real estate, better countries than Canada. So anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and thank you so much for watching. Please check out this video, check out that video there, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.